Every economics textbook opens with scarcity. It is presented as the foundational problem: unlimited wants, limited resources, therefore economics. But a significant portion of the scarcity that actually shapes your life was not discovered. It was designed. Those are two very different things, and confusing them has consequences that run through housing costs, medicine prices, the wage you receive, the options available to you, and the basic texture of daily financial pressure. Real scarcity and manufactured scarcity both feel identical from the inside. That is part of what makes manufactured scarcity so durable. Start with what scarcity actually is in the honest sense. Some things are genuinely scarce. There is a fixed amount of land in a given city. There are finite deposits of certain minerals. There are only so many hours in a human life. The scarcity is not a policy choice. It is a physical condition. Economics emerged partly as a discipline for thinking about how societies allocate genuinely scarce things, how to decide who gets what when there is not enough for everyone to have everything. That is a real problem. It has always been a real problem. The discipline exists because the problem exists. But somewhere in the development of economic thinking and economic practice, genuine scarcity became confused with, or deliberately substituted by, a different kind of scarcity entirely. The kind that is created by restricting access to things that are not physically limited. A piece of land is physically limited. There is only one of it. Its scarcity is real. A pharmaceutical formula is not physically limited. Once discovered, it can be reproduced at marginal cost that is often a tiny fraction of the price charged for it. The scarcity that produces the high price is legal, not physical. It is a patent, a government-granted right to be the only seller of that compound for a defined period. The scarcity is manufactured by policy. This distinction matters enormously in practice. In 2001, at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa, antiretroviral drugs that could extend and save lives were priced at roughly $15,000 per patient per year. The actual manufacturing cost of those drugs was estimated at under $300 per patient per year. The gap between manufacturing cost and market price was not a reflection of genuine scarcity. The molecules existed. The knowledge to produce them existed. The manufacturing capacity existed. What produced the price was a legal structure, patent protection, that created artificial scarcity by making it illegal for anyone else to produce what was physically producible. Generic manufacturers in India began producing the drugs at costs close to their actual production cost. Western pharmaceutical companies and their supporting governments fought this through trade agreements and legal challenges, arguing that without patent protection, the financial incentive to develop new drugs would disappear. The argument is not without substance. Drug development is genuinely expensive. Risk is genuinely present. Some form of cost recovery is genuinely necessary. These are real considerations and they cannot be dismissed. But examine the argument carefully. The justification for manufactured scarcity is always that without it, the incentive to produce the underlying thing would disappear. Remove the patent, and no one develops the drug. Remove the copyright, and no one creates the content. Remove the land ownership right, and no one maintains the property. In each case, there is something real in the claim, and in each case, the claim is also used to extend the manufactured scarcity well beyond what the original incentive argument requires. A patent that lasts 20 years for a drug developed in 3 years, with research funded significantly by public institutions, that generates returns many multiples of development cost, and that is then extended through minor reformulations to block generic competition for another decade, that is not calibrated to the incentive argument. It is calibrated to the extraction argument. The scarcity is maintained not because it is necessary for innovation, but because it is profitable for the entity holding the right. The distinction between the two is real. It is also genuinely difficult to determine in any specific case. This is worth acknowledging plainly. The pharmaceutical company making the argument that it needs 20 years of exclusivity to recoup development costs and fund future research is not simply lying. It is making a real argument about a genuine problem with uncertain parameters. How much protection is enough to sustain innovation is not a question with a clean answer. The appropriate period is not obvious. The line between necessary protection and excessive extraction is not marked in advance. What is visible is the outcome. And the outcome, across multiple industries, is that manufactured scarcity has proven extraordinarily expandable, pushed further, held longer, applied more broadly than the underlying incentive argument requires, wherever those holding the rights have had the political power to expand it. Now look at where the strongest version of the counter-argument lives, because it deserves full weight. The price signal, the mechanism through which scarcity communicates itself in a market economy, is one of the most powerful coordination tools humans have devised. When something is genuinely scarce, its price rises. The rising price signals producers to produce more of it, signals consumers to use less of it, and directs resources towards solving the scarcity. This works. It works in ways that central planning, as the 20th century demonstrated, generally cannot replicate. Abolish scarcity signals and you lose the information they carry. The Soviet Union's chronic shortage economy was partly a product of administered prices that prevented scarcity from being communicated. When bread prices were set below market clearing levels, queues replaced prices as the rationing mechanism. The scarcity was real. The signal was suppressed. The result was misallocation, shortage, and the specific grinding inefficiency of a system in which people spent hours in line for things that should have been routinely available. This is the genuine case for allowing prices to reflect scarcity, including manufactured scarcity. The patent system, by granting temporary monopoly, creates a price signal that attracts investment toward the domain of innovation. The high price of a newly developed drug signals that there is value in developing drugs. Remove the signal and the investment may not follow. The question is not whether scarcity signals are useful. They clearly are. The question is whether specific manufactured scarcities are producing the allocation they claim to produce, or whether the machinery of scarcity creation has outrun the purpose that justified creating it. Here is the floor move. The fastest growing economic domains of the 21st century are built on goods whose marginal cost of reproduction approaches zero. A piece of software once written can be copied infinitely at essentially no cost. A digital song once recorded can be distributed to 1 billion people at a cost that is not meaningfully different from distributing it to one. A scientific paper once written costs nothing to transmit. A large language model once trained can respond to queries from millions of users simultaneously. The physical constraint that historically made scarcity natural, that producing one more unit requires consuming real resources, is absent from these goods. Their scarcity, where it exists, is entirely constructed through legal and technical restrictions. The economist Jeremy Rifkin argued that this trend extended across the economy as more production becomes digitally mediated, points toward what he called the zero marginal cost society, an economy in which the dominant mode of production generates abundance rather than scarcity, in which the old logic of pricing and profit struggles to find its footing, in which the institutional structures built around managing scarcity become increasingly mismatched with the productive reality underneath them. This is a speculative thesis, and it should be held lightly. Rifkin's timeline has proven optimistic. Physical goods, food, energy, housing, medical care, skilled human labor have not been dematerialized. The zero marginal cost phenomenon is real, but its domain remains bounded. The economy is not on the verge of post-scarcity in any comprehensive sense, but in specific domains the phenomenon is genuine, and the response to it has been illuminating. When the internet made music, film, and written content reproducible at near zero cost, the industries built on those products did not celebrate the elimination of artificial scarcity. They lobbied governments worldwide to extend and strengthen intellectual property protections, to reconstruct, through digital rights management, through platform control, through legal enforcement, the manufactured scarcity that physical media had previously provided automatically. The response to the emergence of genuine abundance was a political and legal effort to restore managed scarcity. This response is understandable. Creators need income. Production requires investment. The entirely free flow of creative work creates genuine problems for the people who make it. But the specific form the response took, maximizing the legal reconstruction of scarcity rather than exploring new models of compensation, also reflects the interests of the large intermediary institutions whose business models depended on controlling distribution. The solutions served the record labels and the studios more reliably than it served the musicians and the writers. There is a recurring pattern here. The parties who benefit most from specific manufactured scarcities are often not the parties used to justify them. Drug patents are justified by the need to fund innovation. Most of the entities holding drug patents are not primarily in the innovation business. They are in the distribution and acquisition business. Copyright is justified by the need to support creators. Most copyright revenue flows to corporations that own the rights to work created by humans who received a fraction of its ultimate value. Land ownership rights are justified by the incentive to improve and maintain property. A significant share of urban land value accrues to owners who do not improve or maintain anything, who simply hold locations that appreciate as the city around them develops. In each case, the justification is real. The implementation serves purposes beyond the justification. Now bring this into the pressure you actually feel. The house you cannot afford in the city where work is available. The medicine that exists is patented and costs more than your monthly income. The education behind a paywall that could have changed your trajectory. The platform that locks your content, your followers, your professional history inside its walls through network effects that are themselves a form of manufactured scarcity, making it costly to leave, not because alternatives don't exist, but because your connections are held hostage to your continued presence. These are not natural conditions. They are arrangements. They were built. They are maintained. They produce specific distributions of benefit and burden, and they are almost invariably defended using the language of necessity. Without this arrangement, the underlying thing would not exist, when in many cases what would not exist is the specific profit margin of the entity holding the right. Whether different arrangements would produce better outcomes is genuinely uncertain in many specific cases. The pharmaceutical innovation argument has real force. The creative production argument has real force. Replacing them with something that works as well requires solving hard problems that have not been solved. What is not uncertain is this: the question of where genuine scarcity ends and manufactured scarcity begins is one of the most consequential political questions in modern life. It determines who can access medicine, housing, knowledge, creative work. It shapes the basic contours of what is available to ordinary people and at what cost. And it is almost never framed in those terms in the public debates that ostensibly address it. It is framed as property rights versus theft, as innovation versus freeloading, as the market versus socialism, frames that produce heat without producing clarity about the specific concrete question underneath them. Which scarcities in your life are real? Which were built? And by whom, for what purpose, with whose interests at the center of the design? You will not find the answer by looking at the price. The price is the same either way.